I came home after a 9-day work trip and found my neighbor had poured the foundation for an oversized ATV garage 3 feet onto my property. He had not asked. He had not warned me. And when I confronted him, he just laughed and said, "The old fence is the line. The concrete is already in. What are you going to do? Make me tear it out?" Then HOA Karen Brenda stepped outside, waved an approval folder in my face, and handed me a $200 violation for creating a hostile environment. They treated that crooked fence like it gave Derek adverse possession, even though his new slab was sitting inside a recorded utility easement and may have violated the fire setback too. They thought the cost of the garage would scare me into surrendering my land. But I did not raise my voice. I pulled the title report, checked the subdivision plat, and hired a licensed surveyor. When his orange stakes cut directly through Derek's concrete, I realized their garage was not a victory. It was a trap. What would you do if your neighbor stole part of your land and the HOA fined you for objecting? Would you stay quiet? Or send the survey, easement records, and permit file straight to the building inspector and let the demolition crew handle the rest? Tell me in the comments. But before the orange survey stakes, before the building inspector, and before Derek realized that his garage had become evidence, it all started the moment I turned onto my street after that 9-day trip. The Front Range was glowing in the distance, the peaks washed in that deep gold Colorado gets, right before sunset. The air was dry and cool. Red maple leaves scraped along the curb as I turned onto my street. For a few seconds, everything looked exactly the way it always did. Then I saw the concrete. The back door of Derek's house opened. Brenda Hale stepped outside, holding a leather folder under one arm. Her hair was perfectly styled. Her clothes looked too polished for a construction site, and her expression carried the same artificial warmth she used at HOA meetings, right before announcing a new round of fines. "I heard there was some confusion," she said. "There is," I answered. "A garage foundation appears to cross my property line and sit inside the utility easement." Brenda glanced at the slab, then at Derek. "The HOA Architectural Committee reviewed the plans. The HOA does not own this land. The HOA has authority over exterior structures in the neighborhood, not over recorded title documents," I said. "Not over a subdivision plat, not over a utility easement." Her polite expression tightened slightly. "The fence line has been recognized for years. A fence can be in the wrong place for years. Derek has already invested a substantial amount of money in this project. That does not make the project legal." Brenda shifted the folder in her arms. "You are creating unnecessary tension over a strip of land you cannot use." I almost laughed, but the anger in my chest had settled into something heavier and more deliberate. "That strip belongs to me," I said, "and the utility easement belongs to the easement holder for access and maintenance. It does not belong to Derek." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "You are making assumptions." "No," I replied. "I am saying the recorded documents will decide it." For a moment, nobody spoke. The wind moved through the dry grass behind the houses. Somewhere down the alley, a dog barked. The sound of a nail gun started up again, then stopped when one of the workers noticed Brenda watching him. She opened the folder and pulled out a white envelope. "I need to provide you with this," she said. I took it. My name was printed on the front beside the HOA logo. Inside was a violation notice. Fine, $200. The stated reason was so absurd I had to read it twice. Creating a hostile environment and interfering with a resident contractor project. I looked up at her. "I have been here for less than 10 minutes. You confronted the contractor team," Brenda said. "I asked why there is concrete on my property. You were confrontational." "I did not touch anyone. I did not threaten anyone. I did not enter Derek's property." Brenda's expression did not change. "The board has a responsibility to maintain a peaceful community." The irony was almost impressive. A man had poured a foundation across my possible boundary line. A permanent structure appeared to be blocking a utility easement. The HOA president had apparently approved it without asking me a single question. And somehow, I was the person being fined for disturbing the peace. Derek leaned against the corner of his house, looking pleased with himself. That was the moment I understood the trap they thought they had built. They believed the concrete had made the situation permanent. They believed that once the money was spent, once the framing began, once the garage started taking shape, I would be pressured into accepting it. They believed the HOA could intimidate me into silence, with procedural threats, fines, and neighborhood gossip. They believed I would either explode or surrender. I did neither. I folded the violation notice carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in my jacket pocket. Brenda watched me with visible uncertainty. "You are not going to respond?" she asked. "I will respond," I said. "How?" "In writing." Derek shook his head and laughed. "You're going to lawyer up over dirt." "I'm going to get a survey," I said. "Then I'm going to pull the title report, the subdivision plat, the easement documents, and the permit records. After that, we'll know whose dirt it is." The smile disappeared from his face. Brenda tried to recover her calm tone. "You should be careful before accusing people of wrongdoing." "I am being careful," I answered. "That is why I am not accusing anyone yet. I am documenting everything." I turned and walked back toward my house. Behind me, I could hear Derek muttering to Brenda. I could not make out the words, but I did not need to. Their confidence had shifted. Not much, not yet, but enough. That night, I did not unpack my suitcase. I left it near the front door, still covered with airport dust, and sat down at the dining room table with my laptop. I created a folder and named it Property Line, Utility Easement, Garage Encroachment. Then I started building the record. I saved the HOA violation notice. I photographed the concrete from every angle I could legally access from my side of the property. I pulled old listing photos from when I bought the house. I reviewed security camera footage to identify when the work had started. I made a timeline, the date I left for my trip, the date the concrete trucks arrived, the days framing materials were delivered, and the day Derek claimed the HOA had approved the project. I also wrote down every word I could remember from the conversation. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to humiliate Derek or Brenda, because I had learned something important standing beside that slab of wet concrete. An old fence could be wrong. A neighbor could lie. An HOA could send a fine. But a licensed land surveyor, a title report, a recorded plat, and a properly documented easement did not care who was popular in the neighborhood. They cared about measurements. They cared about signatures. They cared about what had been legally recorded long before Derek decided he needed more space for his ATVs. At 7:12 the next morning, I called a licensed land surveyor in Boulder County, and that was the moment their garage stopped being a neighbor dispute. It became evidence. They had made one mistake. They thought silence meant surrender. The morning after I found the garage foundation cutting across the back of my lot, I woke before sunrise and stood at the kitchen window with a mug of coffee I never drank. My suitcase was still sitting by the front door. My work clothes were still folded inside it, but none of that mattered anymore. Outside, the new concrete slab sat behind Derek's house like a challenge. The previous evening, he had expected me to shout. Brenda had expected me to fight with the HOA. They had both expected emotion to do their work for them, to push me into one careless mistake, one angry message, one confrontation they could twist into a story about a hostile neighbor. I gave them nothing. At 7:12 a.m., I called a licensed land surveying firm in Boulder County. A receptionist answered on the second ring. "Front Range Survey and Mapping. How can I help you?" "My name is Daniel," I said. "I need a boundary survey and an encroachment evaluation for a residential property in East Longmont." She paused for a moment. "Is there an active construction issue?" "Yes." "Do you have your deed, title policy, or any prior survey documents?" "I have the deed, the title documents from closing, old listing photos, and a copy of the subdivision plat." "Good," she said. "Email everything you have. We'll assign a surveyor." I did not exaggerate. I did not accuse Derek of theft in the first phone call. I kept my words factual. A new detached garage had been constructed near the rear line of my property. I believed its foundation crossed onto my lot. I also believed it had been placed within a recorded utility easement. I needed an independent professional to identify the boundary monuments, retrace the recorded lot lines, and document any apparent encroachment. An hour later, a surveyor named Carl Voss called me directly. His voice was calm, careful, and practical. "I looked at the preliminary documents you sent," he said. "The fence is not where I'd expect the recorded line to be, but I won't know anything until I locate the monuments and run the measurements. Can you tell me whether they're on my land?" "I can tell you where the recorded boundary falls," Carl replied. "I can identify whether the structure appears to cross it. Legal ownership questions beyond that are for an attorney or court, but the survey will give you the physical facts." That was exactly what I needed. Facts. Not neighborhood rumors. Not HOA opinions. Not Derek's smug claim that an old leaning fence was somehow stronger than recorded property documents. Carl told me not to touch the concrete, the lumber, the fence, or anything on Derek's side of the line. "Photograph from your property or a public area," he said. "Keep a timeline. Save every notice, email, text, and voicemail, and do not move any markers if we find them." "I won't." "Good. The cleanest cases are the ones where the owner stays disciplined." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and created a second folder inside the one I had made the night before. I named it Survey, Title, Easement, Permit Records. Then I began organizing everything. The date I left for my trip. The date the concrete truck appeared on my security footage. The date framing lumber arrived. The HOA violation notice. The photos I had taken from my side of the yard. The conversation I had documented from memory. By mid-morning, I had sent Carl every document I could find. By noon, he gave me a date for the field survey. And for the first time since I saw the garage, the anger inside me stopped feeling like fire. It became focus. Carl arrived 3 days later in a dusty white pickup truck with a magnetic sign on the door that read, "Licensed Professional Land Surveyor." He was in his late 50s, with a gray beard, sun-worn skin, and the kind of patient expression that suggested he had spent decades settling arguments between people who believed fences, trees, driveways, and flower beds were legal proof of ownership. His truck carried equipment cases, tripods, a metal detector, rolled maps, and a small stack of thick survey sheets clipped inside a weatherproof folder. He shook my hand once. "Show me the problem." I led him to the backyard. Carl did not react when he saw the slab. He did not sigh. He did not shake his head. He simply looked at the structure, studied the old fence, and asked a few questions. "When did they pour this?" "While I was out of town." "Any conversation before construction?" "None." "Did they provide a survey?" "No." "Did they tell you where they believed the lot line was?" "They pointed at the fence." Carl looked at the fence again. "That is common," he said, "and it is often wrong." He began at the front of the property, not the garage. That surprised me. I had expected him to walk straight to the concrete, point at it, and tell me whether Derek had crossed the line. Instead, Carl worked methodically. He set up a tripod near the sidewalk, adjusted a surveying instrument, and began measuring angles and distances against the legal description in my deed. Then he moved to the side yard, then to the rear corner, then back toward the alley. For nearly 2 hours, he searched through grass, gravel, and packed soil. At one point, he used a metal detector near the base of an old cottonwood stump. At another, he carefully cleared dirt from a corner where the fence posts had been installed years earlier. Finally, he crouched down and brushed away a thin layer of soil. "There it is," he said. I stepped closer. Half buried in the earth was a small iron rod capped with a weathered marker. "That is a property monument," Carl explained. "It lines up with the recorded plat. The fence was installed several feet away from it." My stomach tightened. Carl walked 20 yards farther down the rear line and found another monument. Then he set 2 orange stakes, one near the back corner of my lot, one closer to the new foundation. The orange line they created did not follow the old fence. It cut directly through the outer edge of Derek's concrete pad. Carl took several more measurements. He checked them twice, then stepped back from the slab. "The foundation crosses the apparent recorded boundary," he said. "How far?" "Just over 3 feet at its deepest point." I stared at the orange stake. 3 feet did not sound like much when spoken casually. But 3 feet of land multiplied across the width of a permanent structure was not a misunderstanding. It was not a crooked fence. It was not a harmless overlap. It was a physical occupation of someone else's property. Carl pointed toward the rear corridor behind both homes. "And there's another issue," he said. He unfolded the subdivision plat and placed it across the hood of his truck. A shaded strip ran behind the lots. "This is the recorded utility easement. The slab overlaps it." "So they built over both?" "Based on the field measurements, yes." Carl looked toward the garage framing. "The survey will show the relationship between the property line, the easement boundaries, and the structure. That is what matters." For the next hour, he set additional stakes and took photographs from legally accessible locations. He marked the line with temporary indicators so I could see it clearly. The orange stakes stood against the gray concrete like warning lights. Derek's old fence had been wrong, and the garage had not merely followed the wrong fence. It had crossed into land that was never his to use. 2 days after the field visit, Carl sent me a preliminary survey sketch. The final sealed survey would take longer, but the initial findings were already clear enough to make my hands go cold. The garage foundation extended approximately 3 feet onto my side of the recorded property line. The concrete pad also overlapped a recorded utility easement running behind both lots. The easement was not abandoned. It was not decorative. It was not an empty strip of dirt that Derek could claim, because nobody had parked a utility truck there recently. It existed for access. That afternoon, I began pulling every public document connected to the 2 lots. I retrieved the subdivision plat. I reviewed the legal description in my deed. I compared the recorded easement language with the title documents from my closing. I searched the city's permit portal for the garage address. The permit information was incomplete. There was an application for an accessory structure, but the documents available through the portal did not match what had been built behind Derek's house. The listed dimensions were smaller than the footprint now taking shape. The uploaded site sketch appeared to rely on the old fence rather than a current boundary survey. There was no signed document showing that I had granted permission for construction on my land. There was no recorded easement release. There was no written consent from the utility easement holder allowing a permanent private garage to sit inside the access corridor. That was the moment I understood the scale of Derek's gamble. He had not built a small shed that might be moved in an afternoon. He had poured a permanent foundation. He had installed anchor bolts. He had ordered framing materials. And he had done it without confirming whether the land beneath the structure belonged to him. The setback issue made things worse. The garage was not only near the rear boundary, it was positioned so tightly against the recorded line and easement corridor that it appeared to reduce the required separation space for a detached accessory building. I did not pretend to be a zoning expert. I did not decide on my own that the structure violated every city rule. That was not my role. But I knew enough to recognize that a permanent building placed on another owner's land, within a recorded utility corridor, and close to required setback lines would need formal review. So I wrote down only what I could support. The survey showed an apparent encroachment. The recorded plat showed a utility easement. The permit documents did not appear to reflect the actual structure location. The city and utility authorities needed to determine compliance. I printed the documents and spread them across my dining room table. The subdivision plat on the left, the preliminary survey in the center, the permit information on the right, the photos of the concrete pad below them. For days, Derek and Brenda had treated me like a man complaining about a patch of useless ground. But nothing about that table looked useless. It looked like a record. And records had a way of becoming expensive when people ignored them. I spent the next evening assembling a technical file, not a rant. not a threat, not a 12-page speech about Derek's character or Brenda's favoritism. I knew better than to make the case emotional. Every document had a purpose. The first section was a timeline. It showed when I left town, when construction began, when the concrete truck arrived, when the garage materials were delivered, and when I first discovered the structure. The second section contained photographs, wide shots from my backyard, close-up images of the slab near the orange survey stakes, pictures of the old fence line, images showing the garage's position relative to the rear utility corridor. The third section included property documents, my deed, the title report, the subdivision plat, the preliminary survey sketch. The fourth section addressed the HOA. I included the $200 violation notice Brenda had given me and wrote a brief response. I did not insult her. I did not accuse the board of corruption. I stated that I disputed the fine because I had not threatened, interfered with, or entered anyone else's property. I requested the specific HOA rule they believed I had violated and asked the board to preserve all records related to its approval of the garage. Then I prepared the most important letters. One went to Derek. It was a formal encroachment notice. The language was direct and controlled. A licensed land survey indicates that the foundation for the detached garage appears to extend across the recorded boundary line onto my property and overlaps a recorded utility easement. Please suspend further construction affecting the disputed area until the matter is reviewed by the appropriate authorities. I gave him no threat, no deadline designed to provoke panic, no demand for money, just notice. The second letter went to the utility easement holder. I attached the survey materials, the recorded plat, and photographs. I asked whether the structure had been authorized and whether it interfered with access rights or underground infrastructure. The third submission went to the City Building Division. I requested a permit compliance review. Again, I did not ask anyone to destroy Derek's garage. I did not use revenge language. I asked the city to determine whether the structure matched the approved plans, respected the boundary conditions, complied with applicable setbacks, and avoided interference with the recorded utility corridor. I sent the notices by certified mail. Then I uploaded the documents through the city's official portal. By the time I finished, it was after midnight. The house was silent. Outside, a work light glowed behind Derek's garage. I could hear a compressor cycling on and off. They were still building, still spending money, still treating the concrete as if it had settled the argument. But the truth was the opposite. The more they built after receiving notice, the more their decisions became part of the record. The first reply arrived the following afternoon. It came from the utility easement holder. The email was brief, professional, and devastating. They confirmed that the corridor shown on the recorded plat remained active. They had not approved any permanent private structure within the easement area. They stated that access needed to remain available for inspection, maintenance, repair, replacement, and emergency work. They also said they would review the documents I had provided. I read the message 3 times. Then I printed it and placed it at the front of my evidence binder. A few hours later, Derek called. I watched his name appear on my phone screen. For a moment, I considered answering. Then I remembered Carl's advice. The cleanest cases were the ones where the owner stayed disciplined. I let the call go to voicemail. Derek's voice was different this time. No smug laughter. No casual dismissal. "Daniel, call me back," he said. "We need to talk about this. You didn't have to send all that stuff out without speaking to me first." I saved the voicemail. 10 minutes later, Brenda emailed me. Her message said the dispute should be handled privately between neighbors and warned that involving outside agencies could damage community harmony. I replied with one sentence. The matter involves a recorded utility easement and a potential permit compliance issue. Those questions belong with the appropriate authorities. Then I closed my laptop. That was the trap. Not a hidden camera. Not a trick. Not a delayed act of revenge. The trap was their own assumption that nobody would check the documents. They had built on the belief that HOA approval was enough. They had treated a crooked fence as though it had the power to rewrite a deed. They had poured concrete over a boundary and an easement, assuming the cost of fixing it would scare me into accepting it. Instead, every decision they made created another piece of evidence. The survey stakes, the title report, the plat map, the permit file, the certified letters, the utility response, the photographs, the voicemail. 3 days later, the city building division contacted me. An inspector had reviewed the initial materials and scheduled a site visit. I read the email in my kitchen while the morning sun moved across the hardwood floor. For the first time since I had come home from my trip, I allowed myself to breathe. I still did not know what the final decision would be. I did not know whether Derek would be ordered to remove the entire garage, alter the foundation, seek a redesign, or face additional consequences. But I knew this much. The situation was no longer controlled by Derek. It was no longer controlled by Brenda. And it was no longer controlled by the HOA. The orange stakes remained behind both houses, bright against the gray slab. They stood there quietly, marking the line that everyone had tried to pretend did not exist. And now, the people who had crossed it were about to meet the authorities, who knew exactly what those stakes meant. Technical terms and the nonviolent, documentation-led enforcement approach follow the supplied writing framework. Derek chose Saturday for the celebration. By noon, the smell of charcoal, smoked ribs, and sweet barbecue sauce had drifted across the alley and into my backyard. Music played from a portable speaker near his patio. Folding tables had been set up beneath strings of patio lights, even though the sun was still high. The garage stood behind his house like a monument to his confidence. The framing was complete. The roof sheathing had gone up. Fresh metal siding covered most of the exterior. The oversized door had not been installed yet, but the building already looked large enough to swallow 2 ATVs, a trailer, and every excuse Derek had used to justify taking land that did not belong to him. Brenda Hale arrived shortly after 1 o'clock. She wore a cream-colored blouse, sunglasses, and the satisfied expression of someone attending the opening of a project she wanted credit for. Derek greeted her loudly enough for half the guests to hear. "Couldn't have gotten it done without the HOA keeping things reasonable," he said. Brenda gave a small laugh. "That is what a good community board is for." From my porch, I watched them raise plastic cups. They were celebrating a building that had already been flagged by a licensed surveyor. A building that extended more than 3 feet onto my property. A building that crossed into a recorded utility easement. A building that did not match the site conditions shown in the permit file. I did not walk over. I did not interrupt their party. I did not speak to a single guest. Instead, I sat beneath the old oak tree at the edge of my yard with a folder beside me and a mug of tea in my hand. Inside that folder were the documents that had changed everything. The sealed survey, the recorded plat, the title report, the photographs, the utility easement response, the certified mail receipts, and the city's inspection confirmation. At 1:43 p.m., 3 white municipal vehicles turned into the alley. The first was marked for the city building division. The second carried code compliance markings. The third belonged to the regional utility authority. A fourth vehicle, a plain white pickup, followed behind them. It carried cones, safety tape, and a portable utility locator. The music stopped. Derek lowered his cup. Brenda's posture changed before anyone had even stepped out of the vehicles. A woman in a Navy City jacket approached first. Her badge identified her as Maya Torres, senior building inspector. Beside her walked a utility field supervisor holding a tablet and a thick rolled copy of the subdivision plat. "Mr. Malloy?" Inspector Torres asked. Derek looked from her to the trucks. "Yes. We are here to conduct a permit compliance and easement access inspection." For the first time all afternoon, Derek looked uncertain. "This is a private property issue," he said. "My HOA approved the garage." Inspector Torres did not react. HOA approval does not replace a recorded boundary survey, utility authorization, zoning compliance, or building permit compliance. The backyard grew quiet. Even the guests nearest the grill had stopped talking. Inspector Torres looked at the garage, then at the orange survey stakes, still visible along the rear line. "Please keep everyone clear of the work area," she said. "We need access to the structure and the easement corridor." Derek looked toward Brenda. Brenda said nothing. And I stayed on my porch, holding my tea, while the legal process finally arrived at the party they had thrown to celebrate ignoring it. The inspection lasted less than an hour. It felt longer. Inspector Torres compared the sealed survey to the visible foundation lines. The utility supervisor used a locator wand and checked the recorded corridor behind both lots. Another city employee photographed the garage from multiple angles and measured the distance from the structure to the corrected property boundary. Derek followed them closely. At first, he tried to sound cooperative, then defensive, then offended. "You are measuring from the wrong line," he said. "The fence has always been there." The utility supervisor looked up from his tablet. "The fence is not the legal control point," he replied. "The recorded monuments and the subdivision plat are." "But nobody has ever used this strip," Derek insisted. "That does not terminate the easement," the supervisor said. "The utility corridor remains active until it is formally released or relocated through the proper process." Brenda stepped forward. The HOA Architectural Committee reviewed the plans. Inspector Torres turned toward her. "Did the committee receive a current boundary survey?" Brenda did not answer immediately. "We reviewed the homeowner's site sketch." "Did that sketch identify the recorded utility easement?" Again, silence. "Did it include written authorization from the easement holder for a permanent structure?" Brenda's face had lost all of its earlier polish. "The HOA is not responsible for utility documentation." "That is correct," Inspector Torres said. "But the HOA also cannot approve construction that violates documents it does not control." The inspector walked to the garage wall and removed a bright red form from her clipboard. Everyone saw it. The paper was impossible to miss. Across the top, in bold letters, it read, "Stop work order." Derek took a step toward her. "You can't just shut down my project." "I can stop work where the actual construction differs from the approved conditions or appears to violate applicable requirements," Inspector Torres said. "This order prohibits further work until the city completes its review and the violations are addressed." She attached the notice to the temporary construction gate. The red page snapped in the wind. Then she explained the next steps with the calm, impersonal tone of someone who had issued hundreds of such notices. The site had to be secured within 48 hours. No further construction could occur. Derek had 10 business days to submit a corrective plan prepared by qualified professionals. The plan had to address the property line encroachment, the utility easement obstruction, and the site's setback and building envelope requirements. The utility authority issued its own written notice. The access corridor had to be restored, and no permanent private structure could remain within the easement without explicit authorization. The inspector did not say the garage would be demolished that afternoon. The law did not operate through tantrums or spectacle. It operated through findings, deadlines, notices, hearings, and enforceable orders. But the meaning was unmistakable. The garage was no longer Derek's victory. It was an active compliance case. The most damaging news arrived 3 days later. Derek had hired someone to review the site. I learned that only because a survey crew appeared near the garage before sunrise, setting up equipment along the same boundary line Carl had already established. By the end of the week, the city issued a written zoning determination. It did not condemn Derek's house. It did not declare his entire lot worthless. It did something more precise, and, for him, far more painful. Once the actual property line was applied, along with the recorded utility easement and the required setback distances, there was no compliant building envelope left in that rear portion of his lot for the garage he wanted. The city's language was technical. The usable rear yard area was constrained by the corrected boundary, the easement corridor, and the minimum separation requirements. No detached accessory structure of the proposed footprint could be legally permitted in that location. In ordinary language, The site for Derek's garage was unbuildable. Not his home, not the entire parcel, but the exact portion of land he had treated as his private expansion zone was now officially a no-build area for a permanent garage. That distinction did not comfort him. He called me twice that afternoon. I did not answer. Then he sent an email. "We need to work this out. I can compensate you for the strip. There has to be a reasonable solution." I read it slowly. For weeks, he had told me the land was worthless. He had said I could not use it. He had mocked me for caring about dirt. Now he wanted to buy it. I replied with one sentence. "The recorded utility easement and the city's compliance process are not matters I can privately waive." That was the truth. Even if I had wanted to sell him a strip of my land, the easement problem would still remain. The utility holder's access rights were not mine to erase. The city's setback rules were not mine to rewrite, and a private agreement could not turn an unlawful building footprint into a lawful one. Derek tried another path. He asked the HOA board to support a variance request. Brenda circulated a message suggesting that minor flexibility would preserve neighborhood harmony. But the utility authority answered first. Its response was clear. It would not release or relocate the easement merely because a private structure had been built across it without prior approval. The city's response followed. A variance could not cure a private encroachment onto my property. It also could not eliminate the utility holder's recorded access rights. Derek had built his entire plan on the belief that the completed garage would create pressure. Instead, every rule he ignored narrowed his options. The more closely the documents were reviewed, the smaller his legal path became. Derek did not remove the garage voluntarily. At least, not at first. He let the initial deadlines pass, while his contractor searched for a workaround. He spoke to engineers. He called the HOA. He explored whether the building could be shifted, partially cut back, or somehow reclassified. But a permanent slab does not move, because someone regrets where it was poured. The city issued a civil compliance notice. The utility authority sent a final access demand letter. And after Derek failed to provide an acceptable corrective plan, the matter moved into formal enforcement. The outcome was not dramatic in the way Derek had imagined conflict would be dramatic. No one kicked down a gate. No one screamed. No one came to his house in the middle of the night. Instead, a hearing officer reviewed the survey, the plat, the utility response, the permit records, and the inspection photographs. Derek had the chance to speak. So did his contractor. So did Brenda, although her testimony did not help. The hearing officer's written decision arrived several days later. The garage had to be removed from the encroaching area and the utility easement. The slab had to be demolished and the corridor restored to a condition suitable for access. Derek was responsible for the compliance costs. If he failed to complete the work within the ordered deadline, the city could arrange abatement and recover the costs through the available enforcement process. By then, the financial damage had grown beyond the concrete itself. He had already paid for excavation, forms, rebar, concrete, framing, roofing, siding, electrical rough-in, labor, and material delivery. Now he faced engineering fees, permit review costs, legal consultations, demolition estimates, disposal fees, and the expense of restoring the utility corridor. His contractor filed a demand for unpaid work. His insurer reviewed the situation and made clear that ordinary property coverage did not automatically pay to correct deliberate construction that violated site conditions. The garage had been meant to add value. Instead, it became a costly reminder that construction begins with records, not confidence. The demolition crew arrived on a cold Monday morning. They came with a concrete saw, a skid steer, a hydraulic breaker, dumpsters, and a flatbed trailer. A supervisor walked the site with the city inspector and the utility representative before any work began. The crew marked the approved removal limits. They protected the surrounding yard. They separated recyclable metal and lumber from the broken concrete. Then the breaker started. The first impact echoed through the alley. It was not the sound of revenge. It was the sound of a legal order being carried out. I sat on my porch beneath the old oak tree, while the crew removed the garage. Steam rose from my tea. Across the alley, the concrete slab that Derek had treated as permanent broke into manageable pieces. Workers loaded rubble into dumpsters. The metal siding came down. The framing was dismantled. By late afternoon, the area behind his house was open again. The utility corridor was visible. The orange stakes still marked the property line. For the first time in weeks, there was no argument about where the boundary stood. The documents had settled that question. The HOA fallout came next. Residents began asking for copies of the architectural review records. They wanted to know why a major structure had been endorsed without a current survey, without a verified site plan, and without confirmation from the utility easement holder. There was no need for rumors about bribes, secret deals, or personal motives. The paperwork told a simpler story. The board had relied on assumptions. Brenda had treated an old fence as though it mattered more than recorded documents. The HOA had acted outside the limits of its actual authority. At the next special meeting, homeowners demanded procedural changes. Architectural approvals would require clearer documentation. Any structure near a boundary or easement would need a current survey. Board members would be required to disclose conflicts and preserve approval records. Brenda was removed as board president through the process allowed by the association's bylaws. No one cheered when it happened. No one needed to. Her authority had collapsed the same way Derek's garage had collapsed. Not through violence, not through humiliation, but through facts that could no longer be ignored. A month later, I hired Carl again. This time, he returned to set permanent reference markers and prepare the final record survey for my files. I also replaced the crooked old fence, but only after confirming its placement against the true boundary line. The new fence did not claim extra land. It did not hide an easement. It did not cross a single inch beyond my property. It simply stood where it belonged. That was the ending Derek and Brenda never expected. I did not touch their garage. I did not threaten them. I did not use anger as a weapon. I used a licensed surveyor. I used the title report. I used the subdivision plat. I used the utility easement records. And I let the building inspector, the utility authority, and the enforcement process do what they were legally empowered to do. The old piece of my backyard eventually returned. The front range still glowed in the evening. The oak tree still cast its long shadow across the grass, and the only thing left behind Derek's house was a clear, lawful strip of land that reminded everyone on the block of one simple rule. A neighbor may ignore a property line. An HOA may pretend it does not matter. But the law does not forget where the line is. Have you ever discovered that a fence, driveway, shed, or garage was not actually where the legal property line said it should be? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe for more lessons about protecting your home, your land, and your rights.